he must be the first one to have planted a vineyard. He is the
Mhm.
tiller of the soil. So I think that it's kind of one of these etymological stories about how did we discover winemaking? How did we first make wine? And it makes
Mhm.
sense then in a post-flood time period to give that accolade to Noah.
Yeah.
But I think that it also relates to his name. What does Noah mean in Hebrew?
It's related to resting.
Yeah, like rest and relaxation. And I think
Mm.
that we can think about enjoying wine as an aspect of resting and relaxation. He's named that because he's seen as somebody who will bring rest and relaxation. He does that
Mm.
through his gift of giving the knowledge of winemaking to Israel. I think initially, I think it's kind of intended to be quite a positive attribute of Noah. Wine drinking was central to the culture of ancient Israel. Somebody
Mhm.
has to be the originator of that. It's Noah. This is a good thing. This is a prestigious thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
So
then the story takes a turn.
right. So it's interesting because he's described as an Ish Hadamah, a man of the earth, which sounds to me like he's talented. Maybe he has some. He's talented and skilled, and he knows what he's doing. And then because of the ambiguity exactly of the translation of this, but maybe he was the first to plant. Maybe through his ingenuity, maybe his skills, he was the first to plant a vineyard. And then I think also in your book, I never thought about it this way, but this is the first time we've read of planting, the first crop or product, which
Yeah.
I never perceived it that way. It's not only that he was the first to plant a vineyard, but this is the first plant that we see planted.
Yeah. I guess there is an implication in the Cain and Abel story that Cain
Because he
must have
harvested.
planted, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't explicitly talk about him planting.
Right.
Um,
Interesting. Yeah. He gathered, but we don't read of him planting. Okay.
yeah. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at actually what word is used to describe Cain.
Hmm.
But it says he brings produce of the field, whether that's a field he ploughed and planted and harvested, or if he just gathered it from somewhere.
One thing I think about is if he's the first to plant a vineyard, we definitely see that he's the first to drink, at least in writing. But I imagine the way that I think about it is if he was maybe these vines grew, but he was the first to organize them, maybe in a vineyard per se. And then no one necessarily had the volume before. And I'm just reading between the lines. Maybe no one had the volume before, and maybe people had a glass or two, but he had the volume to continue drinking. And he, at the end of the harvest, at the end of letting it ferment, he was very excited, and he just enjoyed himself and fell asleep. And that's wonderful, right? It's just happiness. And then he wakes up and something else happens, which I did explore in a separate episode with Dr. Bergsma. In and of itself, it's not necessarily or inherently bad what he did. It seems almost more that something got done to him.
Absolutely. I'd
Uh,
absolutely agree with you
right.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no sense in which Noah here is being blamed for these subsequent events.
Right.
He's just survived. He built an ark. He survived a flood. He deserves a bit of R&R. He deserves to have a glass of wine at the end of that apocalyptic strife,
Yeah.
I think that the text isn't condemning him drinking or condemning him getting drunk. However, what it does imply is that being drunk can lead you to be vulnerable. It can lead you to being in a circumstance where you don't have your full wits about you, and somebody might take advantage of that. And I think, therefore, in this narrative, the fact that he's drunk works as a helpful narrative device for the next bit of the story. But I think that you could equally have had two separate stories where there's just this idea of the positivity of the origin story of wine after the flood, and then also a story could have had a separate story where Noah's asleep in his tent and this horrible thing happens to him. But I think it creates a narrative bridge to have one lead on from the other, because the text in no sense condemns the drunkenness itself. It doesn't say it's a sin. It doesn't say you shouldn't have done it. There's no negative language used in relation to the drunkenness.